You're recording.
Okay, for our book club, we did Tomorrow Will Be Different by Sarah McBride and forwarded by Joe Biden.
Okay, why is it not letting me? There we go.
So the summary of Tomorrow Will Be Different. Sarah McBride talks about her story of coming out as a transgender woman. Not only was it hard to come out to her family, but also her fellow classmates at her university, where she served as student body president. She later became one of the nation's biggest activists for transgender rights and worked in the White House advocating for legislation. The book is not just important politically, but it's also a personal narrative and love story with tragic loss and heartbreak. The issue we will discuss is discrimination in the workplace, specifically in politics and legislation.
For our first solution, we have educate students more on LGBTQ politics and legislation. And a quote I have is more than 100 bills censoring teachers have been introduced in state legislatures this year, according to a report by PEN America, which is a nonprofit that fights to protect the freedom of expression. And a pro for this solution is that students will understand the more representatives in politics for LGBTQ plus community, the more voices to fight these bills. And a con is there's a little population now of representation, so it's harder for the younger LGBTQ plus politicians to be heard. And in the book, uh, it says the messages help to demonstrate that the gender identity bill was a mainstream position and communicated to inherently skittish legislators that they wouldn't have to stand alone, that these two popular statewide elected officials would stand with them. And it just made me think of like the con I put, because if you feel like you have other people supporting you, you'll be more willing to like do what you want to do. And so I feel like having um you know representatives now will inspire like the younger generation to also follow in more politics and fight for the LGBTQ plus legislation.
And I was also going to add, like, I really like the solution of educating students because I think education, like, can go such a long way because there are students and, like, even people of any generation that don't know about things like this. So just simply, like, educating them on the subject can help, like, when they go to vote and, like, in legislation and stuff like that. So. Did anyone have anything else before I go to the next slide?
So LGBTQ plus discrimination in politics. Solution number 2 is know your rights and advocate for better legislation. Signing one of the most comprehensive executive orders in history on LGBTQ plus rights on his first day in office, Joe Biden signed this bill preventing the discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. And this executive order helps advance LGBTQ plus equality. Laws protecting discrimination on race, color, national origin, marital status, and sexual orientation. And what could you do if you're being harassed or discriminated against? You could speak to a lawyer, file a complaint to HR, keep evidence, make notes, never quit or go at it alone, and wait to talk to a lawyer or HR. And also, how has this affected you?
So I know I personally like haven't been affected by LGBTQ plus discrimination, like whether it's in the workplace or like education. I haven't in politics just because I'm not involved in legislation, but I do know of people that have. So I definitely think knowing your rights is a huge part of it because this kind of goes back to the education piece that we just talked about, is like some people simply just don't know their rights. So even just knowing what they're entitled to, and how to advocate for better legislation, I think can definitely help them. So through this, like from what I've learned, just about how to deal with being discriminated against, me being educated on that, I can share that with my friends that have faced discrimination. So I think that really reaches a long way.
I agree with that. I also have never faced discrimination, but just doing the research for this presentation, it like I really saw a lot like of solutions, and just what really spoke out to me was the like don't go and at it alone, which like I feel like is really important, because if you're already being discriminated against, that's really hard, and just not knowing what to do make it harder. And so like Abby said, just now that I know, if I ever hear, or like if any of my friends or anyone is facing that, I can help them and be kind of their support against that. So yeah.
Yeah, I have never witnessed or felt it either. Um, but I think that it's important to be educated, everyone to be educated on it for sure.
And then going off of that, I also think it's important to go back to the point about protecting discrimination on race, color, national origin, and marital status, because like during this presentation, we're specifically focusing on LGBTQ plus discrimination. But I think we also need to keep in mind that like people can be discriminated against like all these other things as well. So also like knowing how to help people that are facing other types of discrimination is really important. And also, sorry, going back to our last point as well, I know we had talked about like support as well. So like if I'm educated on this, I can help support other people, and then also just like being educated on issues to help support everyone connects back to that book, because at the beginning where she was talking about how she came out, the support that she had was like unimaginable for some people. So I thought that was something really cool to like connect that to.
Yeah, that's good. And also the quote used in this slide about Joe Biden like signing that bill, like especially early on, is like nice, because knowing you have like not just leaders but like the president like supporting you, and like going back to like the voting, like educating people so when they go to vote, like trying to keep these types of leaders in, so um people feel comfortable, standing up for themselves and knowing they're supported, especially by someone as important as the president.
Mhm. So what Kinsey just said kind of goes into our next solution. So our third solution is to vote for LGBTQ plus representatives. And then this also connects back to educating people. So encouraging everyone to vote no matter how old they are. I found this statistic that by 2030, 1 in 7 voters will be part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think it's really important for us to know that like our younger generations are generally like more supportive of LGBTQ plus representation rather than older generations. So knowing that such a huge number of voters in like by 2030 will be part of this population is really important to get that representation in legislation. So going back to the education part, one of the cons of this is that not everyone is educated on how to vote or like how to register to vote, who to vote for or where to vote. And then some people simply just think that they don't need to vote. So specifically on the how to vote, at school we did like a little project on helping people learn how to vote, and a lot of people said that one of the reasons they didn't know how to vote was simply just because they weren't aware on how to register, which is really important, because they did say, like I do want to vote in the next election, I just don't know how to register for that. So I think it's really important for us to be educating people on how to do that so that we can get like certain people into legislation. And then another thing is who to vote for. So some people will vote and they don't really know who they're voting for or what they're voting on. And they just feel like it's their duty to vote, so they don't do research. So I added the question in there, did you vote in the last election and were you educated on each candidate? Because I know for me personally, this past election, like in November, was the first time I was legally allowed to vote. And I made sure to like research each candidate to figure out exactly who I was voting for. And I think like letting other people know like you need to be educated on that is really important. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if you don't know who you're voting for, then you definitely should look into that, because if you're not educated on it, then you might make a decision that you're not sure about.
Yeah, like if I'm being honest, I did not vote in the last election, and I honestly I wasn't educated on each candidate. I feel like when I was like 17, going to be 18, I kind of just like didn't care that much. And so, now I'm like kind of feeling like I have to catch up and like research like what each candidate like views, or like even like the just two different like parties, like what they stand for, and like having to like look into that to make sure like I'm know like who I'm like voting for, who I want to vote for. And I just wish I had more of that knowledge when I was like 18, like just when I was able like to vote. And so now like it's important to like teach the younger generations that, so like they don't have to go through that.
going off of what Kenzie was saying, like I was the same way and kind of like felt lost at first on voting in general. So going back to the statistic of by 2030, 1 in 7 voters will be LGBTQ plus, I think that's really important to like kind of connect the two, because like I said earlier, younger generations who will now be able to vote will be LGBTQ plus, knowing that they may feel the same way as we did on not knowing how to vote. Like they should be educated on these things so that they can like vote for other representatives.
Yeah, and also like just to give like young voters like more like resources too, because like I feel like a lot of times with like social media, and also just like even whatever your parents believe, like you can grow up just to think what they do, and just know that like you can look into it yourself and know that you can have your own opinion. And I think that'd be also helpful just to like give them more resources to like research like what their opinions are, or just whatever they believe.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you mentioned social media, because I know a lot of older generations like hate that. But I know for me, like learning how to register to vote, like was from social media, just from people like sharing flyers on like do this to vote, stuff like that. As much as people really hate on us being on social media all the time, it can be used for good. And like I have learned so much through social media. And obviously I don't like I make sure that what I'm saying is right, and I'll like go back and double check things. But I do think that is a really important thing for younger generations as well, to also learn about like who is being voted for and stuff like that. Did anyone have anything else to add before I move on? All right. So in conclusion, I kept it short and simple. Educating others anytime you can, because one thing we have learned throughout this whole presentation is education is key. And that can be like the sprout to someone like figuring out what to do. So educating others on whether it's their rights, how to vote, or LGBTQ representation and legislation in general is really important, especially for younger generations. And then also being supportive. So being supportive of like your legislation and people who are in office and other people who are voting, and people like coming out openly in legislation is really important as well. So they know they have a lot of support behind their back. Anything else? All right. And then those are our references.
All right, good deal. That was a deliberative forum. Yeah, you have conversation throughout, right? Of the um of the solutions. So then let me ask you this as a kind of final thought, which is part of the like deliberative forum at the end. You only get to choose one option. So what would it be for you? Like what of your 3 solutions is the best one according to you?
Who wants to go first?
I mean, I guess that I feel like the educating, because like I feel like if you educate, then it will kind of lead to like the voting solution too. Just like also, they can kind of like merge that like solutions. So I would go with the educating, because that could just in the long run help as well.
I agree with that because I believe that, of course, you have to be educated on everything. And just like even going into the voting, like you were saying, you have to be educated on the candidates and just knowing representation and just being aware of that.
Yeah, kind of going off of what both of you said, as much as I do want to say like voting for LGBTQ plus representatives, we aren't able to do that without education. So like I said earlier about like education being the sprout of all these other solutions, I think that is definitely the most important part, and just educating others no matter where you are, even if it is on like simple things on like how to register to vote, because like for me that wasn't something simple. So definitely start small with education, and then that will like bloom into other things that you'll be educated on, which will sprout into like our other two solutions.
Yeah, and you made a really good point earlier about like pay attention to intersectionality too, right? Pay attention that it's not just LGBTQ plus. What about the other components like race, marital status, gender identity, and even not even just that, but like gender equality in the sense of like where, because a lot of the bills, a lot of the things that are being pushed right now, I don't think people even realize what they're saying. So think about the what is it, the like woke act or something, and I can't remember what it's actually called. We call it the don't say gay bill, right? But it's not just teaching that, but it's also Florida now has to teach that slaves, they were okay because they were learning skills.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Kind of going
something they have to teach in
yeah,
Florida.
going off of what you said about like the bills too, so like when you're voting and they always have like the little things at the end where it's like yes, no, but it's all a bunch of like legal mumbo jumbo that I don't understand. I think those are also really important to educate yourself on outside of the candidates, because those are also just as important. And like all those like legal words on the paper can get really confusing. So definitely educating yourself on those things as well when you're voting is really important.
Yeah, and I think it's even with oh good Lord, some of the bills are pushing things back a lot, and not just like queerness, but racial stuff, gender stuff. So for example, like a lot of the drag bills, the anti-drag bills and things like that are essentially taking us back to the pre-Stonewall laws, right? About you as a woman, if you wear pants, you can get arrested. It's more than just, I don't think they think about I don't think people realize what they're voting for. Yeah. Well, good job, y'all. I'm gonna stop recording.